Hey folks, and welcome back. And in today's video we'll be looking at how you can actually run the Home Assistant container on a server. Now for me right now my server is a Raspberry Pi 4. So in this video I'll be showing you how you can actually have the Raspberry Pi running Ubuntu. Then we will install Docker and then finally have Docker Compose, which will start up the Home Assistant container. Now if you're new to Home Assistant and if you just want to get started off with it, then I recommend this particular video that I have made wherein I show you how you can install Home Assistant OS on an SD card, and then you can insert that SD card into the Raspberry Pi and connect the Raspberry Pi to the router using the LAN cable. You can skip the part about the Wi-Fi setup over there. Now in this video, let's look at how we can actually set up the Raspberry Pi with Ubuntu and then install Docker in a step-by-step guide. So with this, let's get started. Now, if you already have a server or you already have a machine on which you have some kind of a Linux distro running, then you can move to the next chapter wherein I will show you how you can actually install Docker and then Docker Compose and then start our Home Assistant container. Now let's look at how we can actually install the Ubuntu OS on our Raspberry Pi. So for this, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to this Raspberry Pi imager, and you have this raspberrypi.com/software in which you can download this particular imager. So now you have an imager for the Ubuntu OS because I'm running Ubuntu on my system right now. You can download it also for Windows as well as for Mac. Now I have this already installed on my system, so I'm going to open this. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the OS. Now this is the OS that you want to choose in order to write on the server, right? So I have an SD card installed onto my machine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this other general purpose OS. Now in this section, you will find the Ubuntu OS itself. So let's click on this. And I'm going to select Ubuntu here. Now after selecting this, you have various versions here like the Ubuntu desktop, the Ubuntu server, and many other things. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select the Ubuntu server. You can also use Ubuntu desktop, but since I'm using a Raspberry Pi, this desktop version will have a lot of things like the visual stuff through which you can actually view the Ubuntu desktop itself. So you can then connect this Raspberry Pi to an HDMI port and then afterwards have a monitor connected to it, and you can work with that also. This is also fine actually. But what I'm going to do, I'm conserving a lot of resources by installing only the server, wherein I don't have any kind of a visual view of the desktop of Ubuntu, but I will only connect it to the server and then use as much as power from this Raspberry Pi. So that's the reason I'm going to use the server version here. Now I'm going to use the server version which is of 64-bit, and this is for Raspberry Pi 4. So you can see Raspberry Pi 3, 4, and I'm going to select this 64-bit one. So let's select this, and then I'm going to select the storage here. Now I have this 32 GB which has been mounted on my system now, and I'm going to select this particular SD card. Make sure that this is exactly the SD card that you are trying to write on and not your home system. Okay. So with this part is done, right? Now, when I install Ubuntu, right, on my Raspberry Pi, how does it actually connect to the Wi-Fi? Now this imager actually provides a convenient way to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this particular gear icon, and here you can set a lot of things. Then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to enable SSH. So what we are going to do is actually we're going to connect to our Ubuntu server using SSH. So SSH is a mechanism through which you can connect to a remote server, or basically for me it is a local server using command line. Okay, this will enable SSH for us. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a username. So I'm going to give this a username and I'm going to give it a password. Followed by this, I'm going to give it a wireless connection. Now this is important because when the Raspberry Pi boots up, it actually has to connect to the wireless network, right? So then I can connect it on my machine using SSH. So here I'm going to set the SSID for my Wi-Fi as well as a password. Now this has already been stored. So I will say save, and I'm going to now start writing the Ubuntu OS. This will ask me for the password just to confirm that I want to start writing. And now this is going to actually start downloading the Ubuntu OS for Raspberry Pi and then start writing. So this will take a bit of some time. So let's actually pause the video here and reach once it's done. So As you can see, now the Ubuntu OS has been written on my SD card. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually remove this SD card and I'm going to put it on my Raspberry Pi. That's the SD card that I have. I'm going to plug it into my Raspberry Pi. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually start this particular Raspberry Pi. So let me connect this here, switch it on, and there we go. So the Raspberry Pi is right now running. Now I'm going to wait for it to actually connect to the Wi-Fi network. So give it some time, maybe a few minutes, and this will now actually connect to the Wi-Fi network now. So in the meantime, let's actually open our terminal. So I have this different terminal called as Hyper, which I use, but you can use a normal terminal like terminal here. You can use this one. I'm using this modified version called as Hyper. Now I have this terminal now here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually scan my network. Now to scan my network on the Ubuntu system, you have this command called as ARP scan, and using this ARP scan you can actually find out your network interface for your machine. So this is my network interface, and using this I'm going to actually now search for the Ubuntu server which is connected. Now here, if you see, I have actually 2 Raspberry Pis. So let me run this command again. And if you see here, I have one Raspberry Pi here, which is running on 158. Now this is actually my Raspberry Pi server, which has Ubuntu already running on it. And I'm running the Home Assistant container on this. So I'm controlling my entire home using this container on this particular Raspberry Pi. Now, this is the new Raspberry Pi which I have just connected, and it's already up and running with connecting to the Wi-Fi itself. Now using this particular IP, we are going to do an SSH. So what I'm going to do is SSH Amrut @ and I'm going to specify the IP address. Now this is the username and password that we had set it here. So if I click on this back again and scroll back here, this set username and password, and I'm going to use this username which is Amrut and @ and I'm going to specify the IP address to which I'm going to connect to the server, and the password is a password I'm going to use now next. So when I press enter here, it will ask me for the password and I'm going to enter the password now. So with this, now we are actually logged into our server. So now I'm connected to the Raspberry Pi server, and now we are going to actually start installing Docker. So for this, what we are going to do is we are going to go to Google first. We're going to type install Docker engine, and this result that you see from docs.docker.com, this one we are going to open now. Now this is the official site from Docker, so make sure you come to this site exactly and not any other site for installing Docker, because this is for security reason that you install exactly from the official documentation. Now since we are actually using the one from Ubuntu, we are going to go to this Ubuntu section and we are going to actually now start installing Docker. So now the installation method that you can see here, first of all, it will ask me to do these stuffs. Now a lot of these commands that you can see are pretty much cryptic and it's not easily understandable. So bear with me that you can run this particular commands and this will do these things by yourself. Usually you should not run scripts from different websites, but this website is an official one. There is no problem from running scripts from here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually now going to copy this from here and I'm going to go to my terminal and I'm going to paste them. So it's going to be asking me for a password. Now this will take some time. So let's actually pause this here. So now the first set of commands have been run. We are going to add the official Docker GPG key. So let's copy this and also paste this here. And next we are going to do is we're going to also copy this and we're going to paste this here. Now with this, actually we have set up the repository for actually downloading Docker. We haven't installed Docker yet. So now we are going to actually start installing Docker. So first we're going to copy this command here and we're going to paste this here. So this will take some time. And then finally we will install now the Docker engine and along with this, the entire Docker Compose plugin also. So now you don't have to install Docker Compose separately. Now with this, we will now install Docker as well as Docker Compose. Now you want to see where this part is. This is the part wherein we are going to install the community edition for Docker, as well as we are going to now install the Docker Compose plugin along with it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to now copy this entire command and we are going to paste this here. Say yes to this, and this will now start installing Docker engine for you along with Docker Compose. So this will take some time for the installation to happen. So sit back, grab a coffee, and then wait for it to finish it. With this, now we have actually installed Docker along with Docker Compose. Now to test this, what we're going to do is we're going to run this hello world stuff. So we're going to copy this here and we're going to run this now. Now this will actually pull a Docker image for hello world, and with this actually you will see this particular message, hello from Docker. If you get this particular output, that means your Docker installation is successful. Now what we are going to do is we are going to check if Docker Compose is also present. So what we are going to do is Docker Compose ls. ls means list. Now what you see here is that I'm getting a permission denied stuff. Now why is this permission denied? Because this installation has been done using the root user. Now let's see how you can actually do this so that the normal user that I have right now can access the Docker engine itself. So now to allow this user to actually access Docker, we need to actually provide it some permission. So what I'm going to do now is let's go back to this browser here, and then in this section here called as post installation step, I'm going to click this, and here you can see manage Docker as a non-root user. So I don't want to run Docker in the root permission. I'm going to run it using normal permissions. So for this, let's actually copy this particular command and run this and paste it. Okay, now we have this. Now we're going to add the user to the Docker group. Now with this, we have actually added the user to the Docker group. Now the next step that it says is that we need to log out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out saying exit, and I'm going to log in back again with this. So I'm going to log in back here. And now after login, let's see if I can actually run the hello world. So let's copy this and run this here. So now you can see I can run the Docker image without running sudo in front. So we don't need to give it root permissions to actually run Docker. Now let's actually do this for Docker Compose. So Docker Compose ls. And as you can see, this command is also running all well. So cool. We have now installed Docker on our system. We are now able to actually now run Docker images on our system, and also we don't require any kind of root permissions. So this is the way actually you can install Docker. Now what we are going to do is now we are going to do the most important stuff, that is install Home Assistant. Now for this, what we are going to do is we are going to go to the Home Assistant site, and then we are going to go to the installation section. So we're going to go here. Now if you scroll down, you will find various options here, and what we are going to do is we are now going to go to this section, that is Linux, wherein it says that I can install Home Assistant container. So let's open this here, and then if you see here, this is the place wherein we have our Docker Compose file. So what am I going to do is I'm going to copy this entire thing from here. Okay, and so now to create a file, we are going to use this VI editor. So space VI, and we are going to call this as Docker compose.yaml. Okay, so this is the file that we're going to create, and we're going to paste this now. Okay, so let's open this file. I'm going to press I to start in the insert mode. So in this, I can actually now type in something or paste things. So I'm going to paste this here. So now what it is doing here, let's actually understand this. Now this is saying that it's going to use the Docker Compose version 3, and I'm going to run the service called as Home Assistant. Now this is the service that I have. This service container is going to be called as Home Assistant, and we are going to make use of the stable version of Home Assistant Docker image. So basically this is going to actually now download the image, which is the stable version for running the Home Assistant container. Next, if you see, there are two paths here being configured. One is the path to our config. So this is actually the configuration for our Home Assistant. We don't want this configuration to be present inside the container, because if we restart the container, we will lose all this configuration. So we want this configuration to be present on our system and not into the Home Assistant container. But what we are doing is, using this configuration, we are actually mounting our system path onto the Home Assistant container. Simpler terms is that if you restart your Home Assistant container, your configuration files which was there inside the Home Assistant container will not be lost. They will be still present on your system. If you change this particular image also, you will not lose this particular configuration. Now, if you see, I need to actually specify this particular path. So this path does not kind of exist right now, right? So we are going to create this path. But let's actually look at the other option. So we're going to give this a privileged mode, and we are going to allow it to access the host network. Now, why we want to allow this to access a host network is so that this container can then actually scan everything on our local host network. So on this network, whatever devices that are there, Home Assistant will be able to actually discover them. Okay. So now actually to save this particular file, we're going to press escape, then we're going to press colon, and then we are going to press W, means write, and Q to quit. So this will actually now write and quit. So we have the file written here. Okay. Now what we are going to do, we are going to create one directory here. Okay. Called as config. Okay. Now with this directory, this is the directory on my server right now. Now I need to mount this particular directory onto the Home Assistant container. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go inside this config directory and type pwd. So when I type pwd, it will give me the entire path from the host. So this is the path of this particular config folder that I have. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to come out of this. I'm going to say vim, and I'm going to edit the Docker Compose file. Now here in the volume section, I'm going to remove this part here. And I'm going to press insert, that is I to insert, and then paste this here. So if you see here, what this thing says is that I'm going to map this particular path on my system onto this particular path in Home Assistant. So Home Assistant's config path is at /config, and this particular path, I'm going to map it to that. So my system path will be mapped to this particular location. With this, actually, we are actually done with our Docker Compose setup, and we are also done with our Home Assistant setup. So I'm going to write these changes to the file, and now I'm going to run Docker Compose up. This will now actually start this particular Docker Compose file. So let's run this. So right now it's actually downloading the Home Assistant Docker image, and let's wait for it to start up. So now you see it's actually starting up Home Assistant. So it created the container from the image that it downloaded, and now it's actually starting up Home Assistant. Now to access this particular Home Assistant, what we're going to do is, we are going to actually go to our browser, and remember this particular IP address that we used. We're going to use that same IP address to now access the Home Assistant. So let's start with 192.168, and 130 was the IP address on which my Raspberry Pi is running on, and I'm going to use the port 8123. So this is the Home Assistant port on which actually this particular container is running. So Home Assistant runs on 8123, and we're going to use this. So let's start up, and as you can see, we are actually now accessing Home Assistant from the Docker image which is running on our Raspberry Pi. So this is the way you can actually run the Home Assistant container using Docker and then access it via this particular port. So now with this, we are going to set up our Home Assistant. So we're going to give it the name, and we are going to give it a password, and we're going to confirm this. So let's create this account, and then after specify your country, your language, and press next. and then after that you can allow for anonymized statistics to be shared. I'm right now not allowing them. And then afterwards, as you can see, it has already detected a lot of things on my network. So it has detected my Google Home here. This is an Android TV that is actually running. You can do more integrations by clicking on this, and you can add integrations here. So with this, actually now I will press finish. And voila, we are actually right now in Home Assistant, which is actually running as a Home Assistant container on my Raspberry Pi. And now the advantage of doing this is that I can actually run many applications on my Raspberry Pi also. So now I can install yet another application called as Portainer. So using Portainer, I can actually manage a lot of my Docker images that I'm running on my Raspberry Pi, and this is something that I will do it in my next video. So I will show you how you can actually run a Docker Compose of Portainer, and then one interesting thing is that we will then access it using a menu item here. Make sure you subscribe to this particular channel to see how you can actually do this and manage all your Docker containers using Portainer. And I will show you how you can actually SSH into your container, how you can actually manage, stop your container, restart your container, all of this stuff using the Portainer itself. Now this command that we ran to actually run the container, if you see in this terminal here, it is actually currently running. So if I actually stop this particular command, this will also stop my Home Assistant. So if you see, it has lost the connection on my browser because the Home Assistant is down. Now to actually make this command run in the background, what you would have to do is you would have to type docker compose up space -d, and this will run in the detached mode. This detached mode will cause this particular docker compose command to run in the background. So when I press enter, as you can see, I got back to the terminal, and now this is actually running in my background. So let's give it a few seconds and refresh this. So as you can see now, I'm able to actually access Home Assistant back again, and I'm going to enter my username and password. So with this, I'm able to now access Home Assistant again, and the command is now running in the background. Now in case if anytime you want to stop this particular container, you want to take it down, what you need to do is, instead of pressing docker compose up, we're going to type docker compose down. But make sure you are in the exact same directory where you have this particular docker compose file. Even the docker compose up command, you have to run it exactly in the directory which contains a docker compose file. Then only this thing will work. So right now I'm in the directory which contains a docker compose file. So I'm going to run docker compose down, and now this will actually stop my Home Assistant container. So now this has actually stopped Home Assistant. I can start it back again by saying docker compose up -d, and this will start Home Assistant back again. Give it a few seconds, and here we have the Home Assistant up and running back again. So with this, we learned a lot. We learned how we can install the Docker engine. We actually saw how we can write the docker compose file in this terminal here. And then afterwards, we actually started the docker compose file to actually start this particular Home Assistant. Remember, we had mounted this particular host part called as config onto this Docker container, right? Let's look at the contents for this. So let's clear this up, and in our current directory right now, remember this folder that we had created, config. Let's go inside this. So cd config, and I'm going to press ls. Now these are the configurations that Home Assistant has actually created for us. Now the main file for us is actually this configuration.yaml. We can open this using vi configuration.yaml, and this actually now contains all our configurations for Home Assistant. We'll be doing a lot of edits in this configuration, and we will see how we can customize our Home Assistant to actually do a lot of integrations. So I'm going to press escape and Q and exit from here. So I hope this step-by-step guide helped you actually to see how you can actually run the Home Assistant container on any Ubuntu server. Now, I'll be making more such kind of videos wherein I'll be exploring a lot about Home Assistant. So make sure you subscribe to this particular channel and give this video a thumbs up for more such videos to come. Till then, take care and see you in my next one.